Okay, so this is another Kyosho Lazer ZX-S Evolution that I've been putting together. I had mentioned in the past that if I were going to build one as a runner, I would want to build it out of reproduced parts, primarily the 3D printed parts for like the shock tower mount, the gearboxes, and so forth. That way, at least, I have a bunch of spares that I can, freely print and have available. Because the ZX-S that I have and the ZX-S Evo that I have, the parts, any spare parts that I have for it, that's basically it. Like, I don't really have spares for those cars, so I wouldn't want to run them and risk breaking anything. But with this, I can, drive it like a madman, and if it breaks, that's okay. I can get spares. So anyway, at the very least, first what I want to do is just build it out and see how well it goes together with the reproduced parts. So where did I start? Well, as you can see here, we have these white 3D printed parts for the front and rear gearbox. This is the PA11 material. This, I don't believe you can actually get these if you order from someone else's Shapeways store. I can print them for myself because I own the designs, and so within my store I can go in and print these out for me. Normally when you go on a Shapeways and you order 3D printed parts, they're made out of PA12, which you can get in any color you like. PA11, I think, is just, at least for the time being, is only offered to the owner of the store. It's actually a stronger material, so that's why I've decided to print them out of PA11, at least for certain specific parts. So, and they only come in white. You can't get dyed PA11 parts. The bumper is dyed PA12, and what I think I'll do here, because the 3D printed parts have a certain texture, I might end up putting like some protective tape on the bottom side here of this bumper, so that way, when you hit a jump face, you have a smoother surface that slides along the jump face. I ran into this problem when I ordered a 3D printed front bumper, I think for one of my RC10s, and when I was doing some testing inside here, that bumper was grabbing against the jump face on one of my basement test videos, and I think just the texture of the bumper makes a difference. So if you're going to use a 3D printed bumper, put some like clear protective tape on the outside. That'll help to smooth it out. It'll also help to protect the bumper. So that's for the front gearbox, and then for the rear, the same thing. These PA11 bottom halves here, and then for the actual carbon parts, it's a bit of a mishmash of original and reproduced parts. So this, I just want to mention here, this top piece here, this I'm using a PA12, which is readily available in the Shapeways store. The reason why I'm using PA12 here is because structurally, I don't see this as having to deal with a whole lot of stress because it's braced on either side by the shock tower and then this piece here, whatever you want to call it. So I think this will be fine. So, okay, where was I going? The plate parts. So I did get the shock towers reproduced. Now you can get, okay, so if I take a step back, you can get all these plate parts from Fiberlight in the UK. They do a fantastic job. Those are the parts that I used for my ZX-S Evo restoration. I had wanted to have an American supplier for some parts because if I live in the United States, so I can order parts and get faster shipping, maybe spend a little bit less money. And I do have some copies of these parts from an American supplier. He does not appear to have offered these parts yet on his eBay site, and I would say it's so far a bit of a mixed bag. The shock towers are faithfully reproduced, and what's really cool about them is I have some extra holes. So I have two rows of holes on the top and bottom here for the shocks, and a 3D matrix here, a 3x3 matrix, of inner camber link mounts, so you have more adjustability. And then likewise up front here, 2 rows of holes, not hose, and 2 rows here for the inner camber link mounts on the front. The reason for this is because on the standard ZX-S and ZX-S Evo towers, it's the topmost holes here that are actually part of the stock tower. But if you're running on a high grip track, you want to increase the roll center. It means to drop the ball stud. So that's why I put another row down here. And then I think on the stock ZX-S rear tower, it's the center row that you would have. So I just put one above and below. Okay, so those fit fine. When I had the chassis reproduced, the upper deck, it looks okay, but the lower deck had some issues with the hole placement for this part of the chassis here, where you put the kick-up plate and the nose, the little brace that attaches the kick-up plate to the front of the chassis. Those holes were not in the correct position to mount an actual kick-up plate here. And this kick-up plate is a reproduced plate from Pargu Racing. It's an exact reproduction. So rather than drill a bunch of new holes in that chassis, I just went back and I to my original ZX-S Evo chassis that I sort of replaced with the Fiberlight parts for my Evo build. So I figured I would just use that here and the original upper deck. I could use the reproduced upper deck, it is fine, but I had to use the original chassis. So, and also on that reproduced chassis, there were the countersinks to all the holes were a bit cockeyed, so I'd have to go in there and re-countersink everything, which is a pain in the ass. So for now, I'm just going to put those chassis aside, and I'll figure out what to do with them later. But at the very least, again, you can get those parts from Fiberlight, and they will go together fine. For the rear gearbox, right, because this also uses plates, there's a left and right plate here, okay, and then you have this piece here. These are all reproduced units from the American supplier. For the most part, they're okay. The only issue I ran into was with the bearing housing for the left and right bearings on the rear diff. The curvature was a bit off, so I just had to Dremel that out with a sanding wheel just to make it fit right. I think I also had to file a little bit along here just to help it fit in the contour of the bottom left and right halves for the gearbox. So that took a bit of trial and error to get it to actually fit well, but eventually it did actually, as you finagle with it, it goes together okay. Some of that could be the way the carbon parts were cut. Some of that could have to do with the 3D printing of these bottom left and right halves themselves, because if you look at them, you'll notice that they don't look exactly perfectly aligned. Maybe they're a little cockeyed this way or something, because the 3D printed parts are softer. This PA11 material, it is more flexible than the original Kyosho plastic, which is a harder plastic. It's stiffer. So you do have that to deal with as you're assembling these gearboxes, and you'll notice that for the rear as well as the front, especially the front, because you have 4 quarter pieces that you have to put together, and so it's going to flex more as you're trying to assemble it. But it does go together okay. And as far as fitment, once it's all together, it does actually, it doesn't seem to bind up or anything. Everything spins okay. I mean, it's a little tight, but that could just be my choice of belt that I've used, which I will get to in a moment. What else do I want to go through? So, getting back to the gearbox, I decided to use gear diffs for the front and rear. So these are the same kinds of gear diffs you would get in a Lazer Sport or a Lazer Alpha, or I suppose even a Lazer ZX. And the reason I went for those is kind of twofold. Number one, I don't have that many spare Lazer ball diffs. Also, the thing with ball diffs, although they're more easily adjustable, the problem is with this type of arrangement with the ZX-S style platform, to service the ball diffs is a pain. The front, not so bad in terms of taking off front pieces, maybe not so bad, but the rear is a colossal pain in the ass. It's actually a lot easier to service ball diffs on the rear of a gearbox for a ZX or a ZXR. This ZX-S type rear gearbox is a royal pain to put together and to take apart and to put back together. You got to put things together to fit certain pieces on and then take other pieces off to put other pieces on, and it really takes a while. So I figured, well, why don't I just put a gear diff in here and just call it a day. Now, I didn't just keep the gear diffs as stock. What I did, because if you just have, to go back for a second, if you use stock gear diffs that would come from, say, a Lazer Alpha or a Lazer Sport, they're kind of loose. So what you can do, and I mentioned this earlier in some of my Kyosho Inferno 10 videos, is if you take the gear diff, you open it up, and on the input shafts you put some shims in there, total of maybe like 0.4 to 0.6 millimeters total. It'll induce a little bit of extra bind between the bevel gears inside the diff housing, so when you tighten it up, it gives it a little more of a tight feel. If you go too much, it'll lock. So there's some adjustability there with the gear mesh with shims that you can use to essentially tune this relative tightness of the diff. So I went with somewhere around 0.6 millimeters or so of shims on the inside, and it feels maybe a little tight right now, a little clicky, but once everything's on and the wheels are on, it should actually feel pretty normal. So the idea there is I will have a zero maintenance gearbox, so I'll never have to take this freaking thing apart ever again, hopefully. I did go, instead of with the hyper clutch setup, I went with the sort of older style ZXR slipper setup and lace shaft. I do have a hyper clutch. I just figured I had this lying around, I would throw it on, and also this allows me to have the adjustable front one-way, right, which again you can do with the hyper clutch, but I just had this assembly together already, so I just threw it in. And then I have some spacers in here to space things out appropriately. So these left and right spacers here are 7 millimeters, and then this, I actually didn't even measure this out, did I? Let's measure this out. You need a total of 22 millimeters on the inside here. So this here is a 20 millimeter standoff, and then I just put another 2 millimeter spacer in there. And that seems to go together just fine. Now you will also notice, kind of zipping through this, there are a couple of parts, like the front rear inner hinge pin mount, the rear fronts, and the rear shock tower mount. These are a gray 3D printed material. That's because Shapeways now offers, I forget the exact name, but I believe it's either a PA11 or PA12 with glass beads as part of the mixture inside the 3D printed material. I have not tested them for strength. They do feel a bit stiffer as far as tensile strength goes, like how much I can really crank on it before it breaks. I haven't tested that yet, but I figured I'd try them out, especially for the rear shock tower mount. So I have a rear shock tower mount in this material, also PA11 and PA12, and if you're getting it from PA12 material, which is the more readily available material, and you want to beef this thing up, really just get some JB Weld, some epoxy, and just fill in all the holes, and that should make it a bit stronger. That's something I've done on my Tamiya Manta Ray on the plastic shock tower pieces to keep the post from cracking or splitting. Some JB Weld really helps there. So I'm going to just go without it for now, but using just the stock part here. But the point being, there's a hybrid of parts. I have some glass-filled parts, some PA11 parts, and some PA12 parts that are throughout this build here. So right now I have the front and rear gearboxes fully assembled. I do have, so for the center belt here, this is from Polybelt, and this is a S3M 549 belt. And then this rear belt is also from Polybelt. It's an S3M 177, I believe. Let me just check that. That is, let's see. Oh, I think the text kind of wore off. Yes, I believe that's 177. So it's a 177, and I did put in a little, let's see if I can get the right lighting here. anytime I'm at this desk, the lighting isn't exactly perfect. If I go in there, you see there's a little roller bearing in there. So I did put the roller bearing in, okay, to help get some belt tension to keep this from skipping. And the way that roller bearing goes in, you see it's right there. I put it in from this side. So that makes it kind of tricky because that means I have to screw it in from this side, which means this has to be mounted. This belt has to be on for me to put this thing on, which means to put the belt on, I need this diff in place and relatively stable. But in order to access that screw, I can't have this motor plate on. I gotta take this motor plate off. So there's parts that, but if I take that off, I have to have this slipper hub off, which pulls the bearing out, which means this center pulley is gonna be loose because it's not mounted on the slipper hub. So there's just like all these pieces that are relying on each other that are kind of off or free floating. But that allows me to put this roller bearing on this side. If you were, maybe a little smarter, you might put it in from this side with a longer screw coming across. You could go either way because these left and right halves are exactly identical, and the hole for that is right here. So there's a little hole, and it's a slotted hole that you can use to adjust it. So you could do it that way, or you could take a 2mm Allen wrench and then cut the tip down so you could just slot this in on the inside here between the motor mount and the gearbox half. I do have one of those somewhere, I just can't find it, so I had to do this the hard way. As for the rear wing mount, as you can see here, these I think are old Trinity wing mounts. I have some sort of older Kyosho style wing mounts. I decided to go this way for now just because I have these lying around and I figure I just want to give them a try. So there's no real reason why I did that. I went with an Exitech ZX-6 aluminum steering rack for the steering rack. So I've said this in multiple videos. The ZX6/ZX7 steering rack is exactly the same as the older blue colored optional steering rack for the Lazer. And I think, what else did they have at that time? The Super 10 or the Pure 10. The only difference being the servo horn piece over here just has one hole instead of two. But geometrically it's the same. The Exitech one is kind of interesting though, because instead of the ball stud mounting vertically like this, you have a fixed vertical position. So if you want to adjust bump steer, you have to do it on the steering knuckle. But it mounts, ball stud mounts this way, so you can play around with Ackerman, which is not something that's easily done on the older Lazers, where you'd have to actually have a different drag link plate where the hole is pushed forward or backward or something like that. So this can actually give you a bit better tunability. So I look forward to using that in the event that I actually end up running this. We'll see if I actually run it. So this is where I am right now. I am waiting on some turnbuckles to come in so I could start doing the suspension pieces. Until then, I'm going to play around with the batteries. So I got some little battery plates here. The thing with putting these lipo trays in is if you want to use the original Kyosho Lazer posts, these posts will actually get in the way of the battery. So there's going to be a little bit of overhang from the post into the space where the lipo goes. So you actually have to take these and sort of cut some of it off or shave it down if you want to fit it in here and actually fit the battery in. I had to do that on my ZX-RR, which is over there somewhere. So you could do that, or you can just get a slimmer post, like maybe a standoff like this or something. So I'm going to play around with that and see what works best. I haven't really decided which way I'm going to go. So yeah, that's where I am right now. I think it looks kind of cool in terms of the colors, and I'm looking forward to actually trying this out. I've never made a four-wheel drive buggy that's kind of a reproduced buggy. So this will be pretty exciting. And yeah, we'll see where this goes. All right, so that's it for now. Thanks for watching.